Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the third and final day of our Adult Education and Literacy Summer Business Meeting. We hope that you have been enjoying it as much as we have been enjoying providing the content. Our live event will begin shortly. While we are waiting for everyone to join, let's go through some basic controls. If at any time during the session you would like to access the closed captioning, you can select the CC icon located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. At the top right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a dialog bubble with a question mark. If you click on that icon, it will open the live Q&A. This will be where you ask any questions you have during the session. You will see three tabs on the Q&A pane: the Featured tab, the My Questions tab, and a Filter tab that allows you to filter the questions by most recent or most liked. Under the Featured tab, you will find all the questions and answers published by our moderators. You can select the thumbs up icon next to a question that you like. The My Questions tab will show all the questions you submit and any private replies from the moderator. At the bottom of the pane, please click the purple Ask a Question button if you'd like to submit a question. Again, you can filter questions based on the most recent or the most liked by using the drop-down menu next to or to the right of the My Questions tab. When you select the purple Ask a Question button, this will take you to the My Questions tab pane. At the bottom of the pane, please be sure to type your full name to the right of the person icon. In the box under your name, type your question. Then click the icon of a paper airplane to submit your question. Our moderators are available to publish those questions or respond to you privately. Again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we will begin in just a moment. So again, we'd like to welcome you to day 3 of our Adult Education and Literacy Summer Business Meeting. Today's first session will be on AEL program updates, and our presenter will be our Interim Director, Mahalia Baldini.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Happy Friday. You made it. We, as Maria said, are in day 3 of our summer business meeting. Hopefully, you've been able to join us in all of our sessions. We started on Wednesday. But if this is the first time that you're joining us, welcome. What I'm going to be doing today, kind of at the top of the day here, is I'm kind of treating this like our general bi-weekly call. So I want to go over a few just program updates and maybe give you a little bit of future forecasting of what you guys can expect coming down the pipeline. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully you've got your coffee and you're ready. I'm excited about our afternoon session, which is over Teams. And getting to show you guys some prototypes of what is to come and what to expect when Teams opens this program year. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Hopefully you can see that. So just a couple of things here in terms of the agenda and what you can expect for us to talk about today. A couple high-level topics. We're going to do just a year-end review for the last program year. We like to do this every summer when we have our business meeting, just so we can take a look back. It's been a tough year, so it's nice to kind of go back and look at some things with the perspective that we have now and everything that we've been through, and just take a look at how things really shook out at the end of the year, and then looking forward into this program year and all the great things we're going to accomplish this year. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's happening now. I know many of you are very anxious about targets and where we are with all of that. So I want to make sure that we get to settle some nerves on that. And then we will be talking about what does the future really hold moving forward, and some things that we can start planning for and talking about right now and strategizing for right now. So before we get started, I wanted to talk about some staff additions and some updates. I sent out an email a little while back that basically said that and maybe it wasn't clear, so I wanted to kind of discuss that. We basically had a little mini reorg within our own division in the agency. And what that did was it moved the contract or grant managers actually down to our department in AEL. They used to reside under board and AEL contracts, which was under Jen Troke, and was managed by Travis Weaver. And now Kara, and we have a vacant position, is going to be actually in the AEL department. So this is kind of the lay of the land and the way things that look right now. We're still a small team, but we're mighty as always. I did want to say that the vacant position is now posted. So if you know anyone that's interested in being a contract specialist in the AEL department, we do have that posting. It's open in Work in Texas, and you can go there and you can, check it out. Because of that, and because of some of the changes, and obviously we had a very big change recently with Anson leaving, and we've had to shift some things around and make sure that we're keeping the wheels on, essentially. And in order to do that, you can look for some new program assignments or realignments. So we're going to review the current program assignments of all the staff, and we're going to see if we need to shift some things around so that we have coverage on all the topics that we do and all the things that we cover in AEL department. From our core grantees to our state leadership projects, we have a lot of work. We also have a lot of policy work that we have coming down the pipeline for this year in response to the last legislative session, as we're looking forward to the next legislative session. So we've got to make some adjustments in the meantime. So I will be sending out an email or working with your program specialist to kind of reach out to you and make some introductions if you are going to be getting a change in assignment. So how will you really know if you're going to be affected by that? You're going to receive an email from me, and it's basically going to notify you of the change. And then there'll be some introductory emails from your new assigned program specialist. So if you don't get an email, then you're in the clear and there's no changes for you. And I want to also say, before we get too far into this, you have a question and answer box. Maria went over that at the top of the meeting. Go ahead and use that as we're going through this, because I want to be able to answer your questions here live. This is one of the only sessions, actually it's the only session in the summer business meeting that we haven't had prepped materials. The reason for that is because I was really hoping to get some information that was going to be just in time, kind of hot off the presses, and I didn't want to have to pull back things and make big revisions to things that were sitting out there. So once the session is over and I think we're good, we will do an accessibility check, and then we can go ahead and post that to the same web page. We'll keep that active, so where you've been going through the TCAL webpage to get your other materials for other sessions, we will update and put this PowerPoint on there for you to pull down. But that's why it's not on there now. But go ahead and ask questions. I really want this time to be, for that. We had a really great session yesterday for the high school equivalency vouchers. You guys asked a lot of questions, and that actually really helps us. So feel free to jump in there and ask any questions, and I will pause throughout the session today so that I can answer the questions for you. So in terms of how these program assignments or realignments really change, who you contact, or sort of what the business process is there, not a lot on the general email boxes. So you're still going to, for general program technical assistance questions, you're still going to call the AELTA, email aelta@twc.state.tx.us. Obviously, for Teams access or Teams general questions that you have, we still have the Teams technical assistance email box. That's where you would send those questions. And then for your grant, budget, or expenditure questions, and to submit all of your deliverables, we still have the AEL contracts box, and all of those are owned by us. So the bail box is no longer going to be active, so make sure you're using that AEL contracts box, because our folks will not have access to the bail box. So if you're sending things there, send them to AEL contracts instead. So we're streamlining some communications. I'm going to try to do this both in the TWC transmittals that are coming out from me right now in this interim phase while we await a new director, but I want to try to streamline some communications. One way that we're doing that is we're having our grant managers right now, and also our AEL program specialists working together to come up with one report card. And this one report card is something that you're going to be getting every month, and it's really going to be based off of both the expenditure data for the month that's ready, that data is ready, and also the NPR, which is the performance information. And this is going to be a grantee level report card. So I just want to make it clear that I'm still going to be sending out a TWC transmittal with the statewide NPR or the statewide report card. and any other statewide reports. So we just have transparency for what that looks like at a state level and individual grantee level. The report cards are really, for you guys and for the program specialists and our grant managers to kind of review those and look at the overall general health of the program. So that way, instead of getting something from me and something from, Veronica and something from Kara, we really want to try to build out one report card that you will get every month, and you will get this for the entirety through the grant period. So that way we can always look back within the grant period and say, how did we really do? Were there certain things that we improved on? Things like that. You just kind of have a longitudinal, trend that you can, work from. So each grantee is going to get one. It's going to include, like I said, expenditure data and performance information. It's also going to include the balances of your WII grant as well. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there because there's a timeline for, spending the money attached to those grants and the funds. And we want to make sure that we're having regular conversations about those as well. Sometimes, having those second grants when there maybe not a whole lot of money, you just kind of forget that they're there, and we want to make sure that you guys are pulling down funds and spending that as well. So look for that. I'm going to show you here in just a second what you can expect that to kind of look like and walk you through it. We are welcome to feedback on this. Our folks are still working internally, kind of tweaking it. I really had two big things. One, I wanted it all kind of in one place for you, one report card. But the other thing was really streamlining it so it wasn't so much, because it is a lot of information. So let's take a look at what you can expect this to kind of look like. Again, this is a prototype, it could change, but I just wanted to show you that we will be breaking down the year 2 budget and expenditures. So any money that you still have, as part of your grant, it'll still be in there, and you'll be able to see it every single month as you spend down those year 2 expenditures. It's also going to have your year 3 budget as well, and any expenditures that you have for your year 3 budget. And you're going to be able to see those. At the very, very bottom there, you'll see these WII expenditures. You're going to see your award amount, your contract number, and then you'll be able to see every single month, you'll be able to see what those expenditures are on a monthly basis. So that'll really help us, I think, just in our general monthly conversations, and hopefully be a really great information and a piece of information that you guys can share with your local fiscal folks or local stakeholders to kind of say, this is how we're doing. For performance, you're going to see at the top, or I guess towards the bottom of your report card, you're going to see your year 2 performance for the next couple of months, and it's just a reminder kind of where you were at the end of PY 1920. So you're going to see some status updates there. You're going to see some performance percents of targets and all of that good performance information that we have from PY 1920. Over here in the far right hand, what you'll see is something called performance targets being met. And that's just going to tell you the number of, how many of the individual targets were being met and how many weren't. So it's just real crisp there. And then at the very bottom of the report card, we are going to, once we get the final targets, we'll fill this out, and then every month you'll be able to see where you're moving towards those, those enrollment targets and what's actually happening once we get the data. So I think this will be a good way to kind of codify everything that's going on within the grant, make it simple for both the program specialist and the grant managers to work more closely as a team when they're talking to you guys and when you're having those monthly discussions. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there's any questions out there before I move on. Nothing? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section here. Let's talk a little bit. Yes.
Sorry, you do have one question coming in from Katarina. She's not sure if this is the right question for this session, but will the staff PD exemption forms be processed prior to August 15th? Meaning, will the providers receive a response on whether we are approved to move forward with the staff member in question?
Good question. And yes, if you guys have questions related to the new year, any processes that maybe I don't even discuss in today's session, feel free to ask them. I want to get some answers out there. So you can go ahead and submit your staff exemptions right now. If you know that you have a person that has a staff exemption and you're going to need to submit that, the Teams thing is something that when the new year opens, we can do that in Teams, but we can go ahead and actually process the document for you so that you have an answer approved. You know, you can move forward in terms of hiring and getting your instructors placed. So if you know that you have someone that requires a staff exemption, feel free to go ahead and submit that document to us, Blanca, and submit it to the Teams technical assistants. Blanca is going to process those, and we're going to do the review and send you back an approval or a denial, but normally an approval of the exemption, and then you can go ahead. When Teams opens, we will have to go in the same as you. We're all waiting too. We'll go in and we'll process that in Teams. So there may be a little bit of a data entry delay depending on how long it takes us to process it in Teams. But Blanca and I have discussed this. She's got a great system for knowing when the new year opens. She'll be able to go in and process those pretty quickly. So go ahead and send those in.
Okay. Good question. And Mahalia, Katarina said that we submitted on July 1st, but haven't received a response yet.
Yeah. And if you haven't, I'd say if it's been more than, probably a week or 2 weeks and you haven't received a response, I would follow back up with us, send us another email or forward us the email that you sent. It could have just got lost in the mix, and we will, we'll process through it.
There is one more question that came in from Nancy Crawford. Will we still get to see how we are doing compared to the rest of the state? And Lori did respond, yes, the NPR will still be sent out by Mahalia each month.
Yeah, I'll still send out the statewide one, and we do that here at the agency just so there's transparency. And Adam is still working on a kind of public-facing NPR for us. But yeah, I'll still send that out so you can get the statewide view and still, look at your peers and be able to have that information. The report card's just going to be very grantee level and a little more granular for you guys. Good question. Anything else?
And Katarina submitted again saying that they are part of HGAC consortium. So the requests was submitted on Region 6 on July the 1st.
Okay. It probably came from Taylor then. We can look for that.
All right, that's it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about PY 1920. I'm calling this a year in review, and it's not as in-depth as I would like for it to be, but there's just a couple of things that I wanted to go over that also have to do with kind of what's coming. So a look back, performance-based funding for PY 1920. So we actually had 4 measures, and you guys can find all the language about this in AEL 0220 Change 1. But you can actually see the 4 measures that were approved last year. The first measure was really this enroll, students earlier in the program year was the goal. So we had 65% enrollment by the end of Q2. The measure B was a focus on student outcomes, which was how many of those individuals that were participants in Q2 did we get a measurable skills gain by the end of Q3. And I'm messaging these because these are probably ones that will not go away. I'll talk to you a little bit about what to expect for this year. Those are the discussions that are happening right now. Obviously, everything with going on with the pandemic is just, thrown us all into not wanting to do something just because we made that decision a year ago, because that's not really fair. We have to look at the things in the world that we're living in now and be cognizant of that when we're making decisions. So just like you guys were having to make some concessions on some things, and go back to conversations and doors that we thought were closed, and knock on them and maybe reopen them and think through some things. And then we had two measures, Measure C and Measure D, which were kind of forward-facing performance-based fundings. And these had to do with the implementation of some House bills during the last legislative session and the requirements in them. So we had this Measure C, which was the high school equivalency or ability to benefit enrollment and achievement. That was to be applied actually in this program year, and it was 33.33% of your overall holdback, which is really, like we always say, 1%, because your holdback is 3% total. So we have that still on the books for this year. We are making decisions about that as we speak right now, and we will likely have some more information for you very soon, as well as any other performance-based funding that we are going to have for program year 2021. So we've got this 1% here that's sort of already tethered to this Measure C that was actually approved by the commission last year for this year. So we still have 2% out there that we are now going back and looking at and saying, what is reasonable given the circumstances that we're in? So you will be hearing some more information on that in the near future, but just know that we're taking into consideration all of the things. And then we have Measure D, which is this milestones really in meeting the high school equivalency improvement or more enrollment for high school equivalency programs and ability to benefit. And that's going to be applied in program year 21-22. So the results actually from last program year for the two measures that were really, slated during that program year. For Measure A, I just put on here, so we had 21 out of 37 total grants that met the measure, which was really the result of 54,100 and some change total participants that were either brand new participants, meaning new people that got to 12 hours before the end of December, or they were continuing participants that you guys kept in the program, held over from PY 18-19, but were continuing services with us. And so we had also, I just wanted to point out, an additional 8,000 students that didn't quite have enough to be considered, participants. They didn't make it to 12 hours, but they were students in the system with at least 1 hour. So I think that's always important to kind of look at and think about as well in terms of the potential. And then Measure B, as you know, we rescinded due to COVID-19, and all those funds were released for that measure. And I think that happened back in April. So that's kind of what happened last year with performance-based funding, and you can expect to have more information coming out from me or others in the agency when we get some information on what's going to be happening for PY 2021. So again, these are just some things that I went over, so I won't go over them again. If you are kind of wondering about the Measure C and the Measure D, because we didn't talk about it a whole lot last year, you can always go back again to that AEL letter, read through it. It'll give you some good information and some good background on where we're going with those performance measures and why they are measures to begin with. And it really has to do with legislative session and us having a requirement to implement something under specifically our performance-based funding. So more information to come on that. That is kind of all I have right now when it comes to performance-based funding, which I know isn't a lot, and you guys want to know more, and I'll tell you as soon as I can. I'm going to take a pause before we go to the next slide and just see if there's any questions out there.
So we did have one question regarding the handouts for the session, and we just did reply that there is not a specific handout for this session, but any relevant links that are shown on the slides will be put into the featured tab in the Q&A. And then Mari Frances Casey was just mentioning that she couldn't see the C or D for the measures, but only measures A and part of B on the slides.
Well, I don't, is anybody else? I've got other people out there. Are y'all having trouble seeing the slides at all?
It looks clear from this side. I think it was just the measures A and B were on the previous slide, and measures C and D results are on this slide.
Got it. Yeah, got it. So we'll keep moving on here. And I'm sorry about the sessions handout. Like I said, man, I was hoping to really have some just in time like updates that I was going to slide in there. So I didn't post it, but we will get them to you and have them on there probably, you know, sometime in Monday. I think the PowerPoint's pretty much ready to go, and we can get through that and post it on the TCAL site with all the other handouts, so you guys can have it. So end of year data, I just wanted to kind of show you where we ended up last year in comparison to PY 18-19. I think it's important to kind of see where things ended up, knowing what we know, which was there was a pandemic that hit, you know, right around February and March, and there was a huge impact there. But there are still many successes, obviously, to share. So these are the numbers. I've broken it down by all of your enrollment targets and sub-targets, but then also included MSGs and then credential achievement. And the credential achievement, just remembering there that the reporting period for that credential achievement is always behind like 2 years. So it's good to kind of look back and see where we are for that reporting period, especially with the credential achievement, because that's just one where we should just every year be getting better and better and better and better. As we get better data, as you guys are reporting better data, everybody's getting more comfortable with Teams and having to get that information in there. We're getting better data matches from TEA in terms of our interface with them. So all good things, and those good things lead to higher percents there for the credential achievement, which you'll see. So on the enrollments, obviously with COVID-19, we had really strong enrollments all the way up through January. But then with COVID-19, you know, we just had a slowdown. And typically that point of time of year starts to slow down for us anyway, right about April. And I'll show you some information on that here in the next couple of slides. But you can kind of see how well we did in certain aspects like IET. We exceeded our IET target even in the midst of a pandemic. So kudos to you guys out there that were able to be early implementers for your IET and get those numbers in and get those students in. We also have exceeded our intensive target. So that is working with employers and serving those that are internationally trained and re-entry in our corrections folks. So we did very well in our intensive target as well. And then again, the credential achievement, which is very important. So even though it takes us a while, that's maybe an understatement, a while to get this credential achievement data, look how much better we increased over the course of these 2 reporting periods. So again, the reporting period for the credential achievement was not affected by COVID because it ran from January of 2018 through December of 2018. But we'll be able to see the effects of COVID, you know, in 2022. But we'll be sitting in a meeting probably just like this and looking at the data from that time, and we'll probably be able to clearly see, oh yes, we remember. what was going on there. So there's still lots of things to celebrate. I mean, you guys have done amazing work this past year. Even before COVID hit, we threw out some big numbers, 65% enrollment by December. We had 21 out of 37 contracts that met that or exceeded that. IETs, we exceeded our IET enrollment and our intensive targets. So there's all kinds of good stuff going out there, and that's always the message that we're sending to our leadership when we're, referring to you guys and all the hard work that we know is happening. So I wanted to talk a little bit and look a little more closely at the student services by month. So this is something a couple months ago when the pandemic really started. One thing that was, within the agency, people were saying, how many people are we still able to serve? How many people are still getting services, actual services, sitting in a classroom or doing a distance learning or doing remote learning? How much contact time is still occurring? So if you're looking at this chart, and I'm going to do my best to explain this, if you're looking at this chart, what you have is PY 18-19 compared to PY 19-20. And what they've done is they've said all the students from July of both of these years through February, and you kind of have this base amount, right? And this is statewide data. And then we look at March, April, May, in June, and we say how many students in each of those months were still receiving contact hours in the month. So if you're looking at PY 19-20 in the month of April, what we're saying is there were 19,466 students that had contact hours in that month statewide. And then you go on, you say in May. Now this could be a duplicative student across months. These aren't new students to services per se. These are students that just are getting contact hours. And I'm saying students, and I'm not saying participants for a reason, because I'm not talking about people that already have 12 hours and are in class or any of that. It's literally bodies in learning, whether that's remote, distance, or face-to-face, contact hours. So as you move through from March to June, you can see that there's, always, a decline that starts. But if you're looking at 19 and 20, of course, you're seeing that decline. We had COVID hit, we had all these things happen. But what I want you to look at is compare that to PY 18-19. When there was no pandemic and there was, no outside forces kind of working against us, there is still a rapid decline in the number of students who receive contact hours. Really starting in April is where it starts to really, take a big shift. And that's just something that we message to our leadership is kind of like, this is the general trend of how enrollment works in AEL anyway, which is why we have performance-based funding measures that say you've got to get, the bulk 65% by December, because when we look at the data, this is what it is. It's right after that last quarter, right into quarter 3, we tend to just have students that, do not get a lot of contact time. So overall, if you're looking at just the percent of students that continued services March through June, and then it doesn't look like COVID made much of an impact, right? But we know that that's not true at a local level. But I just wanted to share this with you because it's something that we get and things that we have to kind of walk through and talk to our leadership about. So it's pretty interesting information. And I shared this with you guys through the TWC transmittal when I sent out the NPR. So if you wanted to see for your individual grantee what this looks like from year to year, you can go and you can find that in the TWC transmittal. I think for May is when I sent that out. Another great thing happening here is I wanted to talk a little bit about our distance learning numbers, because this has been, you know, the shining star, I think, during this COVID, which is really, you know, the utilization of our distance learning. So in comparison to PY 1819, look at the results of numbers of individuals that have either started distance learning programs, beefed up their current distance learning programs, or the number of students that we've been able to serve in general. So if you're looking at both of these columns, I want to kind of walk you through what the data is telling us. So number of grantees, that's easy. Number of sites, I think that's pretty easy to understand. Number of teachers, wow, you know, we had 518 teachers in PY 1819 that were utilizing distance learning curriculum. For PY 1920, we have 829. Number of participants overall, those are the number of participants, you know, in the program for those 2 years. And then the number with proxy hours and 12 direct hours. So in PY 1819, the 15,188 there that you're seeing on that line, that's the number of participants that had proxy hours, but also had 12 direct hours. For PY 1920, you can see the increase there with the number of participants. Those are people with 12 direct hours that were also using distance learning and achieving, you know, proxy time. The number with proxy all, or just number of individuals, regardless of that 12 direct hours, were receiving some sort of proxy time. And you know, that makes sense, because when COVID hit and we were unable maybe to initially get students in to get their first, you know, get those 12 direct hours under their belt through any kind of face-to-face, or we're kind of just setting things up and they were in distance learning maybe only initially, then it has an increase, obviously, of proxy time without any direct hours. But the real kicker, I think, is the number of participants that are in distance learning overall. So we had a 9% increase in the number of participants that were receiving some sort of distance learning curriculum and participating in distance learning. So that's great. So I just wanted to share that. We got this information, and I think it's just, you know, important to, we'll keep looking at things like this at the end of every year, just as a look back to kind of say, you know, what happened when we got to the end of the year. And I like to share that information with you guys as we're, you know, it's very timely. Right now we're working on all of our NRS reports. And so these are all the things that, in comparison to our federal data, you know, we look at from year to year. So I wanted to share it with you guys. I'm gonna, any questions out there before I move on to the next section? All right, let's do it.
We have one from W. When is the next time to apply for the AEL grant? How many years do we have with the current award in the consortium?
The next AEL grant competition is scheduled, I want to say 2023 is the start date. So we are in the third year right now of a 5-year grant. The way the grants and the contracts work is it's the first 2 years, and then we have 3 one-year renewals, and we are in the third year. So we've got 2 more years under this RFA, and then we will be starting a new one in July 1st of 2023.
Thank you. And Luis Martinez asks, is the end of year information the same as in the June MPR?
Yes. Yes, it is.
All right, Luisa Nail says, we developed an online enrollment with all of the information required on Teams and TWC. Does TWC have to approve an online enrollment before we put the online enrollment live?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Can you say it again?
So they developed an online enrollment with all of the information required on Teams and TWC. Okay. Does TWC have to approve an online enrollment before they put it on that online enrollment live?
I don't think so. If I'm understanding your question correctly, when you're saying put it live. So if you are the person that asked that question, if you could give just maybe a clarification, I'll come back to it. But I believe the answer is no. We don't have to approve any, students that are coming into the system. That's something that you guys do at the local level through eligibility.
And she may be just asking if we need to approve that like online enrollment form before they post it live. If they've developed something to go online.
And if that's the question, the answer is no. What happens there and how that kind of, in terms of a control mechanism, it always happens through monitoring. So if the TWC monitor comes out, what they're going to do is they're just going to look to make sure that you are collecting all the information that's required to be collected. And that you're following any guidance that we have when you're developing your process, and that's it. And if you're not, then they will, tell you you need to do this, X, Y, and Z. But in terms of having a pre-approval process for those, like a enrollment form or anything like that, we do not, and we do not require that you guys submit those to us.
And does that also go for like any kind of enrollment process that they create?
That is correct. That is correct. So no, you don't have to get any kind of pre-approval from us. We have guidance out there that kind of cribs out what the local requirements are for those things. The first place to really look for that is your contract. We've got contract language that specifically says these are the things you need to have in your orientation. This is what needs to happen there, intake. And then we have what are called AEL letters. That really have the information in terms of what you need to collect from the student, whether it's, you have to ask for an SSN, a driver's license, whether or not they have an option to not disclose that information. So we've got a bunch of AEL letters out there as well that you would want to take a look at as you're making that process.
And Nancy Crawford asks, so Measure A will be the same this year, 65% by December 31st?
Well, we don't know yet. We are in conversations about that. So my anticipation is that you will still have an enrollment, some sort of enrollment target by the end of Q2, and that you will also have a retention or MSG measure by the end of Q3. That's sort of my early messaging on that, but we do not have anything final. We're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for you guys. Obviously, we don't want to hold this money hostage, but we still want to come up with something that's reasonable in the midst of everything that we know is happening, and in the midst of everything that we don't know what is happening or what will happen in the next 6 months or the next 8 months or the next year. So we're taking kind of all of that into consideration, but just some early messaging for you guys. Yes, it'll probably be something based on enrollment, and then something based on measurable skills by the end of Q3.
All right, and then we just had Tiffany Lee submitted a way to go distance learning.
Woo woo!
And a question coming in from Janine Maldonado. I think that was just about roll call, so we should be good to go.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening now, because I know that you guys have a lot of questions, and generally this time of year we're a little farther along on certain things like target negotiations. So we as an agency, just like you guys, I'm sure locally, we're kind of struggling with getting some things done. Key departments are just working so much time and effort into UI and other aspects and other things that our agency does that we're a little delayed on some things. So for the PY 2021 target negotiation, in terms of the process for that, it is going to be the same as it has always been. And if you're new to the game here, what that is the process really is looking for an email from Adam Leonard, and I will message this early and I will send you guys a heads up as soon as I have, some definitive timelines. But you'll receive an email from Adam Leonard. And for those of you that don't know, Adam Leonard is our Director of Operational Insight. He runs all the accountability for the agency across all programs, all federal funded programs, all GR funded programs. So he is the guy. So he develops a tool and comes up with the instructions. And he typically sends those out to whoever the point of contact is for the grant. So if you've had a recent change in any leadership or anything like that, or you want to make sure that, we have your information correct, reach out to us, because that's how he's going to reach you. He's going to come to us and he's going to say, I need the master list, right? And Elena's going to say, here it is. And when you guys notify us that the list needs to be updated, we update it. But if you don't notify us, then there's a good chance that it's, going to go to an old contact, which we don't want, because it's going to stall this thing even longer. So Adam Leonard's working on the target negotiation tool right now, but I would expect a little bit of a delay. I've just been kind of poking him every week about, getting a timeline for you guys. So what I will say and what I will message is plan and implement now. I know it's hard because we've got all of these things, kind of pending and in this weird space, but there's just a lot going on. And it's not just because Anson left or anything like that. These are just agency level, things that are happening that we have very little control over. But what I will say, guys, when you get the target negotiation tool, is if you are telling the tool and you are going through the process and you're saying, this is what I reasonably think I can do, giving your circumstances locally. If your training provider isn't coming back online until the spring, if your employers have all shut down and sent their employees home and so you're not going to be doing any workplace literacy classes, or you're going to have to go find new employers, or all of those things that are happening in your particular area, what I'm saying and messaging to you is that even if you get an error in your tool, if you're telling us that's what you reasonably can do, I want you to negotiate that and provide an explanation. So this is a process that when you guys fill out this target tool, if you're saying I can only do 50 IET and you're getting an error and it's saying, well, you got more money to do that, you need to do more, but you know that you can't, just say that and make that explanation and make the case. This really is a negotiation. We know there are circumstances that are happening out there, and we don't know what all of them are at every single local level. We really depend on you guys to kind of, talk to us and provide that information. I say this because the tool is really set up to ensure that we cover the spread for our LBB targets. That's how the tool is designed, which means that every time you go to fill it out, it's going to take all of your funding information and it's going to make sure that based off of the cost per that we've been working under, that we are going to meet this LBB target based off of what you are negotiating. But what I'm saying is, if you feel like that's not reasonable for you this year, then tell us, because what happens is if that comes back and it comes back with an error, program, which is us and Adam, we sit down and we talk about it and we either approve it and say, okay, it's just, we're going to have to just say that we're not going to meet our LBB measure because we have all these great explanations, from the field saying these are the things that, they can't get around. The other thing too that I want to just message there is we will also have a mid-year renegotiation, just like we did last year. I think we had about 6 or 7 grantees that took advantage of a mid-year renegotiation last year. So just know that that's an option. If you're planning right now to get something off the ground, maybe here in the fall, and maybe it doesn't work out or it falls through because of COVID or because of some other circumstance, just know that come, December, January, you're going to be able to renegotiate those if you need to move those targets around into other areas. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions, because I have a feeling there may be.
And you are correct.
And I am correct, yes.
We have a question from Nancy Crawford. Do you have data that compares total number of student hours for 1819 with the total number of student hours for 1920?
You know, actually, and you can probably get that information out of Teams, actually. There are still reports in Teams that will tell you how many contact hours, you know, exist. I think you can get that from the table 4. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it's pretty close. If you're just wanting to kind of see the change in that status, Nancy, I would go there.
And then Luis Martinez asks, what is LBB?
Good question. So the LBB is our legislative budget board. They are the ones that when we are doing our legislative action request and we're saying, this is what we're going to do with these federal dollars. This is the outcomes you can expect from the state of Texas, that we're going to use these federal dollars and our general revenue, Texas general revenue funds, which is all the Texas taxpayer funds. And we're saying these are the performance aspects that you can hope to receive, Governor, from this program. That's what it is. And the LBB, the Legislative Budget Board, they're the ones that kind of say, this is what you said you were going to be able to accomplish with this AEL program. And then if for some reason we don't, or we can't, or something happens, then we have to do something every quarter that is called an explanation of variance, which is basically us telling the governor's office and telling the Legislative Budget Board, this is the reason why we were not able to meet, you know, these targets, and that's really what it stands for, Legislative Budget Board.
All right. And for those who are tuning in as attendees, if you go to your featured tab under the Q&A, you can see these questions as well as the responses. We have another question from W. Will training hours for IET be counted as contact hours in the new program, considering pandemic enclosures, so we can progress test them sooner to gain MSG type 1, or will be just for entering in teams with no credit? And Anne is typing a response, but if you want to talk to that question, Mahalia.
Okay. So the answer is no. Training hours, you know, aren't going to count for contact time when you're talking about, you know, hours between tests, in terms of test taking purposes. What I will say to you guys is, and I kind of messaged this at the Taylor pre-conference session earlier, you know, back in February, is that if you think a student is ready to test them. Early testing, we took the 10% rule out of the assessment guide. That's no longer in there. You still have to do a justification for early testing. But if you really feel that the student is, you know, ready to take that math test or take that reading or, you know, what have you, then test them and put a justification in the file.
All right, and we have another question from Nancy Crawford. If we cannot set the targets that TWC recommends, wouldn't that possibly mean we would have a reduction in funding?
Good question. Right now, I don't think so. I think it's more about, Nancy, I think it's more just about you saying what you can reasonably do. Here's all the things that we don't know, just because we don't have enough data. And this has been my conversation with Adam and other individuals in the agency, is we don't really know what having remote learning classes, if they're fully remote, or if we're doing hybrid classes in the fall where you're having, you know, some face-to-face, but you're having students that, you know, they don't want to come sit in class with 20 people that may or may not have, you know, COVID. You know, we're going to have all these unknowns. And what we're messaging is, we don't know what that cost. We don't know what that cost yet. We're looking at the data from March through June to try to figure out, like, for early implementers and those of you out there, first of all, I really want to thank you guys that were early implementers and kind of, you know, really scaled up and took the spring of last year to scale up remote learning, because it did give us a little bit of data that we could look at and kind of say, here's folks that really did this, and this is what we could tell from just the expenditure amounts and the number of students that you were able to serve, you know, during that time period. But that's really more so what it's about, Nancy, is we don't really know what the cost per is. But what we want to know is reasonably, how many students do you think that you can serve during that time? Now, when we are talking about the money, though, and I'm going to bring this up here in a little bit, is the deobligation. Now, that could happen if, you know, we're not able to get students in the door or something like that. But again, we just don't know what the world's going to look like 2 months from now, 3 months from now. So it's just kind of hard to answer those questions.
All right, and that's all for right now. And so if you are attending, just look at your Q&A under the featured tab for all of those questions and the answers.
The next thing I wanted to talk about here is carry forward targets. So this is another big question, you know, that I know is hanging on everyone's mind, that still has money left over from last year. The proposal that we are making for carry forward targets, for those of you that still have year 2 money, is we are proposing that we are not going to assign targets to that PY 1920 carry forward funds. However, we are still planning to utilize the deobligation option, and we'll start to review those expenditures in the first available month, which is October. And the way that looks in terms of a deobligation timeline, just so we're transparent and we're clear, is that we review the October data in November. So the calculations occur, and we're being very purposeful with how we're looking at this. And that means that we would probably brief commission offices end of November, beginning of December. We would have to get commission action for that. And then in January, complete any amendments or budget adjustments or things like that. So this is sort of the timeline, you know, the deobligation timeline. So it's not an easy process, it's not a quick process, but it is something that we're going to start looking at based off of October's data. So even though we are proposing, and I want to be very clear that this is something we're proposing, this is kind of something that came right off the presses, which is one reason why I didn't have the slides released. Is we're proposing this, it still has to go through a couple of chains of command in order for us to really get a thumbs up. When I get a thumbs up about our proposal, you know, being carried, about no carry forward targets, I'm going to send out an email that's going to have some of this information in it in a TWC transmittal, just because I know that, you know, you guys would want that sort of in written context from this agency. So I will send that out. Now, I will say when it comes to the deobligation of the money, the one thing I want to point out to you is it's not just about the money. It's not just about not spending. It also has to be about when we reallocate those funds back out. We want to make sure that we're reallocating those funds to grantees that have services happening, and have outcomes for students. So it's not just about the money, it's also about performance, and it's also about, you know, how you're serving those students and what type of outcomes those students are getting. So just kind of keep that in mind. Right now, we are going to be working feverishly for the next couple of months to really come up with a process, and we'll be very transparent in terms of what this process is, to decide in terms of the deobligation is pretty set in stone. It's in rule. There's very specific language in there. There's also very specific language about the reallocation of funds. So what the first step we have to do is look in those rules, and we have to, whatever process that we come up with, you know, as a program, it has to fit within those parameters. So that's always the first step. So for the next couple of months up until October, while we're reviewing this data every single month, we have to come up with a process that we're very comfortable with, that if we do have to deobligate money from grantees, we're going to make sure that when we reallocate that money, that it's going to be in such a way that it's really going to bolster, you know, enrollments and performance. So those are just some things that are out there. So future forecast, and I know we're coming up on time here. I just wanted to take a few moments to tell you about some guidance that's forthcoming. We've got a lot of policy that's in the pipeline right now, and even though, you know, the summertime tends to be the slowest for our students, you know, coming in and getting services, it is absolutely our busiest time as an agency. Us included. So we've got end of year reporting, we've got new year happening, we've got all these teams updates, we've got new guidance that's coming out, we've got you know, just so much that's happening. But I wanted to kind of at least tell you guys what new guidance you can expect coming out. So we've got an AEL letter about workforce integration and follow-up activities. This is going to be a change letter. It's going to have an updated SurveyMonkey link for your reporting deliverable for that one. And I'm going to have a slide here that's going to talk a little bit more about that. You have AL letter 0218 change 1. This is the information I've been messaging on the biweekly calls about the changes to Teams access, which is basically just going to be a letter that's going to codify the changes to the instructions that you can find on the web page for Teams access, and some of the new features that we have in there to streamline this, to streamline the process, like the DocuSign P41C, and then this new requirement for the cybersecurity training that has to happen annually. So that letter is going to be coming out to codify those new procedures. We'll have a letter about the allocations. So the commission approved the allocations. We always just put out a letter to say this is just so we can be very public facing and very transparent about who's getting what money and how all that works. So that'll be coming out as well. You will see some information in there about the deobligation for mid-year. And again, it's just going to be basically say, just a reminder, like, hey, we have this option at the agency level to do this mid-year, you know, if we choose. AL letter, it doesn't have an actual number associated with it, but this is just, we're doing a pandemic period, COVID-19 pandemic period, just so we can document all of the things that we did during this time, any additional funding that we put out to grantees and kind of out to the state to do this work and to get us through the pandemic. And then we'll have the letter, which we talked about in yesterday's section, about the high school equivalency voucher subsidy program, and we're going to codify some of those processes and no local flexibilities and requirements in that letter. And then last on here, you can see that this is, we're going to do a new Pearl Elements letter. And this letter is going to be because when we revised the assessment guide, what you probably noticed is that the appendix that listed all of the Pearl elements went away. And the reason for that was, well, it wasn't really supposed to be in there to begin with. So we have to put that information and want to make sure that we have it somewhere other than, you know, you guys having to go into Teams and just say, okay, well, all this stuff must be required because it's on the profile. We want to really kind of, again, codify that in written guidance. So we will be updating all the Pearl elements and sending that out. And there may be a few new ones in there, and that has to do with some additional information that we've received in terms of what we need to do for our joint reporting under WIOA. So that is all the stuff that's sort of, the plate spinning on this end. The one thing I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to make a quick clarification on some ad hoc deliverables. So I think early on there was just some confusion, so I just wanted to go back and kind of walk through these things and try to explain them, hopefully. So you have, under your core grant, we sent out this pandemic response survey. It was like pandemic response survey number 6 or something. And we were basically, in that survey, we're going to be asking you, out of your core grant funds, how much money or how many dollars do you feel like you are spending for such things like staffing, like tech, distance learning licenses, supplies like, cleaners and hand sanitizer and all of these things out of your core money, okay? So that's this survey, this AEL pandemic deliverables. It's due on the 24th of each month. And then we have our WII grant, which is a completely separate grant, completely separate money. It's different in Cedar, okay? And we have a separate survey for that, which is more qualitative. And the reason for that is because in your WII grant in Cedar, when you actually go in to report down your cash draw and do your reporting in Cedar, we have created some supplemental cost categories that we want you to break down your expenditures into those categories. Doing that in Cedar allows for this survey, this WII deliverable survey, to be more qualitative, which is you report the money part and the supplemental cost category part in Cedar, and then on the survey you're just going to give us, really, what do you mean by that? Okay, you had staffing cost of $20,000. In the survey, you're going to say, well, we had to hire 3 new, team teachers to help support, remote learning for our instructors, whatever. Whatever that, sort of qualitative data is, you're going to put that in the actual deliverable. It'll make more sense when you go in there and you click on these and you're kind of walking through it. And the reason for this is because in your core grant, we don't have those supplemental breakouts in Cedar for you guys to really tell us and kind of show us how you're using your AFLA dollars towards pandemic related expenses. But we still, as an agency, want that information because we're trying to, again, just gather as much information as we can to say, these are some of the pitfalls that are happening right now with our grantees, and get a better sense and a better picture and a better vision that we can share to say, these are the things that they're dealing with, and these are, the cost of some of those things to get this program back up and running. So I wanted to just make a real quick clarification about that. And guys, I know that we're over time, and my gosh, I got a Teams session that I have to do at 10:30, which is just going to wear me out.
And we have questions.
And we have questions. So on the questions, and I said this yesterday, but for those of you that weren't able to join us yesterday, all the questions that you guys are sending into the Q&A, if for some reason we don't get to them today, just know that we are going to pull those out. We are going to put them in writing and we are going to answer them. And then all the questions from the summer business meeting that we've gotten from day 1 to now, they're all going to be in one document, and we will put those into headers based off of sessions, and then you will get all the Q&A in a written document. That's how I would like to do things so that, we can get that information out to you. So don't think, you've got to try to record this on your cell phone to get an answer that I said. We're going to put that in writing and send it out to you guys. Real quick, before I answer any questions and before, we take a little break, I want to send a reminder out. We put this on the biweekly call for the last couple of, I think all through July, but we have a Fall Institute that's coming up in September. It's from September 15th through the 17th, and I think there's going to be a pre-conference on September 14th. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that since I put it on here. But we want you guys to submit proposals. This is going to be a virtual conference. So submit your proposals. You guys are doing some amazing stuff out there. We want to be able to showcase that. And because we're doing this virtually, we're going to open this thing up. We're going to have community stakeholders there. You're going to potentially have some national organizations that want to, join in and really learn about what we're doing here in Texas, and what you guys are building and what it takes to build those things. So anything related to a really nice process that you're proud of, that you put in place, that has helped during this time, to showcasing some instructional strategies that have been winners for you at the local level, whatever it is, send in those proposals. We want to hear them, and we want this to be a really a good spotlight session and a good spotlight institute for Texas in September. Submissions are due August 3rd, so that's rapidly approaching here. So if you haven't submitted one already, call a friend, get an idea together. The survey is very simple, and get that in, because we want to showcase everything that you guys are doing. Okay, questions?
All right, so you have a question from Susan Gussler. She's saying remote assessment is rough because of students' lack of technology skills and computers. How will non-baseline students we enroll be considered with the targets? Will they count towards enrollment? Count against us for MSGs?
Really good point. And Susan, those are kind of the refined details that when we do our, like for performance-based funding, for instance, there's no way we can count them like for our federal targets or anything like that, because we haven't gotten any clearance from Octane to count sort of students that we can't put on, a federal reporting table. But in terms of like performance-based funding, those are things that we can consider, and we can kind of message that. So that's really up to us at the state level how we want to do that. So that's a really good point. Hopefully Fabiana's out there and listening, because we're meeting with leadership this week. But I think that is something that we would take into consideration. Students that are just unable to remote test. So thanks for bringing that up, Susan. That's a good point.
And Donnie from Weatherford asks, can or should providers propose a voluntary deobligation?
Wait, say that again.
Can or should providers propose a voluntary deobligation?
You absolutely can. And there is information in the rules for voluntary deobligation. It's pretty simple. You can send us a letter. And I would say, you guys know best what's going on locally, and what best is kind of happening, and what your local districts are planning, or your local organizations or entities are planning, moving through the year. It's going to be tough, and it's going to be, very different, I think, out there in different places. So yes, Donnie, if you are interested in that or want to learn more about that, contact myself, send us an email, and we can get you all the information that you need if you're just kind of wanting to know. But it is in rule.
And there is a question from Anonymous. If there are additional items required on the enrollment form, additional Pearl items that would not be required until the date of the letter, correct? And
that is correct.
Students enrolled since July 1st would not be affected.
That is correct. Absolutely.
All right. And then
I hear you. And I'm tempted to tease you with something that I've put on Elena's plate. So I'll go ahead and throw it out there. I got with Elena, I think at the end of last month or beginning of this month. I don't even know when, but whenever we are through this, my goal is when the Pearl letter comes out, is that we will have a standard form attached to that Pearl letter as an option. But we are working, I tasked Elena, we're going through all these Pearl elements, we're going through all of this, stuff, and putting it into a PDF fillable form. that you guys can use, you know, it will be an option. But I know that's always a huge request that's coming out from you is like, can't y'all just do a form? Why do we have to do it? And so we're gonna do that for you guys. It just may take some time, but I think we'll have it ready for when the Pearl letter comes out as an option.
All right, and Nancy Crawford asks, and both of the surveys for the deliverables will be sent to us each month. That is correct. Those go out around the 20th of the month.
Yeah, and the link is static. That's a good point, Nancy. So the link on those is going to be exactly the same, right, Elena?
Yes, that is correct. And
okay.
So just a note, since they have specific deadlines to submit those based on your contract, once we hit that deadline, we actually close the survey collector. And so if you have any kind of delay, you would need to message that to us to be able to open it again. And so just know that there will be a limited window for filling out those surveys between the 20th through the 11:59 hour on the 24th. Kathy Dowdy asks, when can we get the overview of CEDAR, the categories and the comments that will be needed?
For the WII grant, I'm assuming those are already in there for your WII grant. The supplemental categories are already open in your CEDAR account. I'm not sure, Kathy, if that's what you mean, but you can already see them in there.
And then Brenda Schofield from Region 5 asks, was there an AEL survey other than WII due on the 24th? I believe we only had the WII deliverables open this past 24th.
That's correct. We're saying these are going to be due on the same day because one is just an ad hoc deliverable that wasn't in your original contract for your core grant. And then for the WII grant, this was actually a deliverable in your contract for your WII grant. So what we're saying is we're going to have them both due on the 24th because we want you to be able to do your CEDAR reporting, which is always on the 20th, before filling out either one of these surveys. So this ad hoc survey deliverable for your core grant is sort of a new thing that we're putting a 24th timeline on.
Yes, and so we had a couple questions kind of coming in clarifying about the surveys. And so Anonymous had asked, they thought the WII survey replaced the pandemic survey.
Yeah, there was I think a lot of confusion out there. That's why I wanted to kind of codify some things and go through it today. And the reason for this particularly is because we do internal reporting for all of this. And what was happening is we were getting some numbers on the WII grant survey. Okay, I spent $20,000 on this. I spent $15,000 on this, and I spent $15,000 on this. But the problem is that money was really actually coming out of your core grant, not your WII grant. So if you think of it in terms of how we are reporting this and how people are looking at this every month as an agency, what was happening is we were going to the leadership and we were saying, oh, you know, our folks are spending all of this money on COVID related, pandemic related, scale up, ramp up, tech, staffing cost, all of this stuff. But then we go in CEDAR and you guys are not spending anything off of your WII grant. So it was just kind of weird how it was set up. And so we just want to make it very clear and very crisp to you guys and to us of where the money is coming from. If you're spending money for pandemic related staffing cost or things out of your core grant, we want to make sure that that's very clear that that is money coming out of your core grant. Because what I don't want is for us to keep reporting, oh, this is what they're reporting on their WII survey deliverable, that they're spending this money on these things, and then we get to, 4 months from now and we still have 1.5 out of the $2 million sitting in there because it hasn't been drawn down. I didn't want to get in that situation to have to try to explain that. So that's why we just want to make it very clear that if you're spending money out of your core grant, we want you to report it in one place because you don't have supplemental categories in CEDAR to report it. And then if you're spending it out of your WII grant, you do have supplemental categories in CEDAR that are very explicit based off of your contract language, that you can put that into actual CEDAR and then just give us the qualitative information related to those expenditures in the survey. So I hope that's clear. Clear as mud, maybe, but.
Okay, well, thank you, Mahaya. We want to make sure we give you a little bit of a break before we start the next session. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a short break here. Thank you so much for giving us those updates on the AEL program. And just as a reminder, if you have not already, please click on the survey link in the Q&A and fill out the survey for this session. Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder that we will be starting at 10:30. I'll be going over the intro, and then we'll also be going over some save the dates with you. And again, that will be at 10:30 in about 3 minutes. Good morning, and welcome back. We are going to start the last session of the day in just a few moments. Again, we hope you have been enjoying this summer business meeting as much as we have been enjoying providing the content. I'm going to go ahead and go through some basic controls, and then we're going to talk to you about some save the dates that we'd like to inform you. If at any time during the session you would like to access the closed captioning, you can select the CC icon located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. At the top right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a dialog bubble with a question mark. If you click on that icon, it will open the live Q&A. This will be where you ask any questions you have during the session. You can see 3 tabs on the Q&A pane: the Featured tab, the My Questions tab, and a tab that allows you to filter questions by most recent or most liked. Under the Featured tab, you will find all the questions and answers published by our moderators. You can select the thumbs up icon next to a question that you like. The My Questions tab will show all the questions you submit and any private replies from the moderator. At the bottom of the pane, click the purple Ask a Question button to submit a question. Again, you can filter these questions based on the most recent or the most liked by using the drop-down menu to the right of the My Questions tab. When you select the purple Ask a Question button, this will take you to the My Questions tab pane. At the bottom of the pane, please be sure to type your full name to the right of the person icon. In the inbox under your name, type your question. Then click the icon of a paper airplane to submit it. Our moderators are available to publish those questions or to respond to you privately. And now we are going to switch over to Ann Savino, who is going to inform us on some save the dates.
So good morning, everyone. Nice to be here today. Before we get started again, I'm just going to give you a few save the date items so that you can pencil these on your calendar and know that something is coming up. So for AEL directors, I want you to save these 2 dates, and your key staff actually, as we go on, we'll be getting you more information and you can decide who can accompany you. So on December 3rd, just a short 10:30 to noon session, and then September 14th is the pre-conference to the Fall Institute. So let me give you a little bit more information. We're planning PD to increase the support for your efforts to provide intensive services. So the efforts for serving internationally trained professionals is being led by Train PD by Liz Moya. And in addition, we have a great group of AEL providers with key staff that have been very instrumental in moving this service effort forward over the last year and a half. So on the 3rd, we're going to roll out some strategic approaches to serving this population, talk a little bit about what the data is telling us, and then lay out the PD efforts being designed to support your efforts throughout the year. So on the 3rd, we're just giving you a short overview with some information and some possible homework for you to look at in terms of your own data. And then on the 14th is the pre-conference day to the Fall Institute. So you can go to the next slide, Maria. So for the pre-conference day, we're doing a full day for the directors. I have it written here as a conference day, but it's a pre-conference day to the Fall Institute. It's on the 14th, and the full day will be devoted in the morning to serving internationally trained, and then in the afternoon for corrections 101, and then AEL and vocational rehab integration. So we're really looking forward to these efforts. After Tele in February, we had a great day with the career navigators, and a lot of the feedback we got from them on these 3 topics was that they really wanted to be able to share and support, better support their programs and work with the directors on this. So we are rolling out all of these services in a little bit more robust way than we have in the past at the pre-conference to the Fall Institute. So we're really looking forward to this. Veronica is going to continue on her work that she's doing in corrections, and she'll be doing the Corrections 101. And then Maria on our team will be sharing and working with bringing in some providers on working with AEL and VR integration. So it's going to be a great day, great effort, and we'll get you more information about the time, etc., that we're going to be doing those sessions and all the content. And then you can go to the next slide, the final slide. This is the other part of the pre-conference. You know, as we always do this pre-conference day to the Fall Institute. So we've got one track for directors, and then we'll have concurrently a track for PD coordinators and distance learning leads. So stay tuned for more information about all that, but just pencil in these dates and we'll get you more specifics going on. So that's all I got. And Lori, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on the PD coordinators and distance learning leads.
Sure, the leads will be in the morning, and then in the afternoon we'll do the PD coordinators. We decided to run them longitudinally rather than in competition for one another, because we do have a lot of staffing overlap between the distance learning leads and the coordinators. So we'll be running all day long with the distance learning leads in the morning and then the coordinators in the afternoon. That's all I have.
Great. So we're looking forward to this. There's been a good effort, particularly on these 3 intensive services, and we'll have lots of new information and lots of support from what's going on around the state and actually around the country on some of these efforts. So we look forward to seeing you on the pre-conference day and during the Fall Institute. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Somebody tell me if you can't. Thank you so much for those updates. So yes, we are moving ahead and rapidly planning for our Fall Institute. So again, get your proposals in and do your planning in terms of being able to attend those pre-conferences. It's a lot of great information. And I just want to send a shout out to my staff who've been working, very hard to ensure that we're delivering content that's going to be very useful to you guys, and is going to continue, the mission that we set forth in terms of, these individual populations. So great job, team. I'm really proud of us. So the last session of the day, here it is, the team's updates. Y'all wore me out in the last session. I don't know if I can get through this. I've got Cheez-Its and some Mayo energy water, so hopefully we can make it through this. So let's talk about the agenda and some things I'm going to be covering today. And again, if you need handouts, there is an actual outline of what we're going to be talking about today in the TCAL website that you can grab if you want to follow along or take notes. So for today, this is what you can expect when the new year opens in Teams. We are going to have an option for a non-NRS assessment. We are going to have the ability to have a non-NRS designated class. So we will be able to track actual individual contact hours for our non-NRS tested students, which would be very beneficial. And going back to Susan's comment from the earlier session, where she asked, for those of you that are just joining us, she basically asked, hey, can we count these non-NRS students towards like a performance-based funding or enrollment or something like that? And while we can't count them federally, maybe there is something we can do to count them in the general performance-based funding. That's an option. So thanks for bringing that up, Susan, because we will be getting these individual class contact hours in the new year. The third thing here is the revised testing pages. We made some revisions to the actual assessment and pre-post test gains pages, which I'll be going over with you today. If you got the materials early, you've probably been looking at them already, and I bet you have questions already queued up for me. So I'm looking forward to those questions. And then I'll talk a little bit about future plans, which is profile alignment to periods of participation and a new public assistance page, which means you're going to be able to view these TANF match results that we will be doing for our back-end TANF funding and those things, so we can continue our combined funding mechanism. So those are today's agendas and the things that I want to get through, hopefully in the next hour and 15 minutes or so. So what's next? We're going to take the chat questions submitted today again, and we will categorize them into some specific webinar topics to answer some of these questions. We will do the FAQ from today's session just like we are with all the other sessions. But what I'd like to do is kind of take those questions, categorize them a little bit, and then have some additional webinars that's going to help to just, support any planning or any kind of process development you guys need at the local level. So we'll be utilizing all the questions from today to do that. Okay, let's talk about the non-NRS test options that you're going to have available when we open up the new program year. So what this means is no more passes tracker. You will be able to add students, new students that are coming into the system that do not already have a NRS approved test in Teams somewhere in the last 365 days before they are registered for class. If they don't have that, you will be able to track them in the system. But you will also have this option for the non-NRS assessment. And you can look at our remote testing letter. I've put some references on here, and also our Serving Students at a Distance document to see some of the things that we've codified in there as in terms of local process and what this really means for you guys when you're having to bring new students into the system that you cannot do a remote test for, an NRS approved remote test. And what the AL letter specifically 0320 does, just as a reminder, is it really defines the non-NRS approved test, and it gives you some options. So it allows for sort of a placeholder assessment while you're developing and implementing remote testing requirements. So we understand that the remote testing option, while it is available, it is more cumbersome. It probably requires more staff time. It's not like a total savior for us in terms of making sure that we can continue our testing practices like we always have done. We understand that there are challenges there. It's also it creates a reasonable attempt clause in the letter. And what we're basically saying is that you need to start working towards, if you haven't already, at least making an attempt to come up with a remote testing policy at the local level, where you are getting students into remote testing for NRS approved test. It creates some parameters around NRS testing prioritization. So we give you some feedback in the letter that basically says you should really be looking at students whose tests are either going to expire if they have a former NRS approved test that may be going to expire. You can prioritize certain individuals, and that language is in there as well, and we kind of help to support some recommendations for that. It mandates that you have an SOP for remote testing. Again, reasonable attempt. You have to make a reasonable attempt to have a remote testing policy, and then we want to see what that SOP really looks like. And it requires grantees to enter all non-NRS tested students into Teams. This enhancement was actually released this month, 7/15, but the expectation is this is going to be for PY 2021 students that are going to be carrying over into that year, or new students coming in. It also introduces this term in the letter called provisional functioning level. And so this is the individuals for staff determined eligibility. They're coming in, they're filling out their Pearl documents and their enrollment forms, and maybe you're not able to do any sort of remote testing for that individual. What we're asking is that based off of the information that you have and any other non-NRS approved tests that you may be giving them, like for instance, a TSIA, or we said you could utilize a TABE locator in the testing, or I'm sorry, in the letter. If you have some sort of space during that staff determined eligibility process, we want you to assign them this provisional functioning level. It may not be based off of a score that you're getting on any kind of test. It may just be based off of your individual interactions with the students and the information that you're getting during the intake and orientation process. So, what does that really mean in terms of what you can hope to see and what it's going to look like in test? When you're putting these non-NRS tests into teams. The pathway is the same. So we kept the same pathway in terms of data entry purposes. You would basically go to your participant record. You're going to go to your assessments tab, and you're going to select to add an assessment. When you do this, you will notice a couple of things that are going to be new in the drop-down in terms of what's available for you to select for these non-NRS approved tests. So the updated assessment drop-downs, we're doing a couple of things there. I went ahead and took the opportunity to update the drop-down for selecting an NRS or selecting an assessment in general, and I removed all the old stuff. So all of the old tests that were in there that we no longer use, like the TABE 910 or the old BEST test or anything else that was in there. Because as you guys know, when you would go into that instrument group drop down, there'd be a whole list of things in there that we no longer use. So I went ahead and removed all of those that were outdated. And then we added some additional things. So the things that we added were this thing that you see highlighted here under instrument. It says non-NRS approved assessment. So that is now going to be an option in the drop-down. We also added the HiSET official practice test, and we added the GED official practice test. There is also an update to the TABE locator in the drop-down. And this is really, it's just to create more flexibility and simplify the approach for you guys. You don't have to scroll all the way through a bunch of, old tests and old assessments that we no longer use. So that you can easily get to the one that you want to select. Well, let me go back here. The other thing too, you'll notice under the domain scores, so once you've selected this instrument group non-NRS approved assessment, you'll notice this provisional functioning level. And this is going to be a requirement for you to select one of these provisional functioning levels. So if you think that the student coming in based off of their TABE locator results are going to be somewhere in the AB intermediate high area, you can select that. And this is a best guess. This is the best guess that we have based off of the information that you've received during your intake, orientation, and eligibility screening. So we're just putting that in there so that on our end, we have some idea about where we think this student was when they first entered our program before they started receiving services. There is still a score option in there, but it is optional. So if you are utilizing, just a staff determined eligibility, but no actual academic content related test, you don't have to put a score, you don't have to make up a score. It is optional. But if you are using like a TABE locator or some other academic or content related test that provides you with a score, you can put it in there if you want to. So the scale score is very different than a score. A scale score is very specific and it's tied to NRS approved test. And it's tied to NRS approved achievements in terms of pre and post testing, which is why we changed it to just say score and not necessarily scale score. The scale score in particular, guys, when you are looking in teams, those are based off of the GED computer-based test that we're getting from TEA through our match process. So if a student goes in and they take, for instance, the math portion of their GED exam, we get that through our match process, and you will see that also in Teams under other assessments. And that may have a scale score associated with it. So it's still going to look the same when you go into Teams in terms of having that scale score will be there. But when you are doing your data entry piece, the only option that's going to be available to you is just simply this score column. So hopefully that makes a little sense there. So that's why the scale score is pretty much going to be disabled for you. It's not something that you need to do a scale score for. That's something based off of the data match that we get from TEA. Okay, so that's about like entering the actual non-approved assessment into Teams. Are there questions out there, Elena?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sure there are.
All right, we have a question from Tiffany Lee.
Yes,
Will you
ma'am.
be discussing the employment outcomes tab with today's agenda?
Ooh, I wasn't planning on it, but I can. If we have time, let's circle back to that. I'm open to discuss anything that we have time to today and get some answers for you guys.
All right, and Abel Guerrero from HCC. If a student starts off as a non-NRS, but later is tested with an NRS approved test, will the direct hours count for the entire time or just from the NRS approved test date and forward?
Good question. And it will only count for reporting purposes or for traditional performance purposes in terms of your contracted performance and things like that, from the time that they have an NRS approved test and forward. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about how that works and the business rules that we've built into Teams to help with that.
Okay. And then we have from Tiffany Lee, GED official practice test equals GED ready test question?
GED official practice test and GED ready test. Yes, same thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then from Tara, how will assessments look like for returning students whose approved NRS tests are about to expire, but they are in class after July 1, 2020? Will assessment after July 1st be baseline or post-test if their latest assessment is more than 150 days, less than 365 days, and they achieved a gain by June 30th, 2019? And we can break that up if you want to do that.
Wow, that is quite the question, Tara. We may need to break that one up. So let's start from the beginning, Elena, and just walk me through the kind of the first part there.
So how will assessments look like for returning students whose approved NRS tests are about to expire, but they are in class after July 1, 2020?
Okay, so the first part of that is that here's the way the testing works in Teams is when you go to, it tests for an assessment at 2 points, okay? The first point is at the class registration date. So when you go in and you add that student and you register that student for class, it's going to take that date and it's going to take that instrument that you've selected and it is going to look and make sure that there is an active and valid test based off of the progress calculator, and we'll talk a little bit later about what that means. And for you guys, that is basically, if you select TABE on the class registration page, it's going to look to see if there's any TABE, any TABE test within the last 365 days that it can use to say that that is an instrument to, register the student for class. Then the second point that it's going to go back and look at the assessments is at the point of the first contact hour in the class. So So for instance, if you register someone for a class, let's just say July 1st, and that student at that time had a test somewhere within the last 365 days, it's going to allow you to register them. If the first contact hour for that student doesn't start until September, when you go to enter that first contact hour, it's going to do the exact same thing. So if that 365 days has expired between the July 1st date that you registered that student for class and the date of September 1 when you went to enter the first contact hour, it will give you an error. And it will not let you, enter those contact hours, and it's going to tell you you don't have a valid test. So those are the 2 points that Teams looks at, looks for a valid test during the class registration. Any point after that first contact hour, it does not. What it will do is it's going to check back every time you enter a contact hour. It will check back and it will say, does this person now have an NRS approved test if you are in a non-NRS designated class? I'll go over that in just a minute. What's the second part of her question?
So the second part is, will the assessment after July 1st be baseline or post-test if their last assessment is more than 150 days less than 365 days, and they achieved a gain by June 30th, 2019?
It's always, and this is been the same, since time began. It really depends on what your local processes is. So you guys have 2 options at the beginning of every program year. What it's going to do, again, at that class registration point, is it's going to look back to the last test available within that 365-day window. And it's going to say, and it's going to pick up whatever the earliest tests are in each content area of that instrument group. So if you say TABE, it's going to look back and it's going to say, give me all the TABE assessments within the last 365 days. And when you enter that first contact hour, it's going to bring all of those tests forward to act as the baseline for that program year. If there's no test available, then it's not going to let you, which means you would have to establish a baseline prior to class registration at that point. And this is why I think pulling the MSG report is very helpful. And really going in there and digging in to see when was the last time that these individuals had a test, so you can determine if they have a valid test. So hopefully that answers your question. But
all right, and we have a question from Katarina. Can providers be allowed to administer only one of the TABE tests? This would help reduce the amount of time we need to spend supporting the student remotely. The current assessment guide says we have to administer other areas within the first 12 hours.
Yes, if it's a brand new student coming in and there's no other test that can be, pulled forward to be used, and you have a brand new student coming in, what the assessment guide says is you can administer one test that's going to basically allow, you to put them in class and get them started, and then you have to administer the other remaining tests within that time frame. I guess the real point is Teams will allow you to enter the person into a class, and they will allow you to just use a math test. What the guide and what the policy says is that you can still do that, but you need to include a justification in the file as to why you only administered like a math test. So you still have that option even within the policy. What I'm contemplating and why I kind of paused is to say if we wanted to allow an exception for those individuals outside of that time frame that we gave you, which was 12 hours or 5 days, and you can just put the exception in the file. So if you could send us that, I think in writing, that would be something good we could put in the FAQ in terms of just a pandemic related question. And get you a written answer there. I'm fine with it, but I just want to, send it to us in writing so I can know for sure what you're talking about.
And Rowdy from ACC asks, so we can't mix NRS assessed students in the same class with non-assessed students?
That is a good segue, and I'm going to answer that within the next couple of slides. So let's talk about that question when we're talking about these non-NRS classes and the ability to report students on a class level in a non-NRS designated class. Thanks for the segue there. So for the way the classes will now work is you will now have an option for non-NRS approved students to be entered at the class level. The issue with being able to enter students, prior to all of this is we had no mechanism for a student without an approved NRS test to be registered for a class. We've now created that option at the class level. So when you add a class in Teams, you can designate it as a non-NRS approved class. Everything else about the class in terms of a data entry perspective is the same. So there's this one new box with a new field. You would click it to designate that all the students for this specific class are going to be non-NRS approved tested students. What this really allows you to do, again, other than just designating specific classes for these non-NRS students, which makes it easier, I think, for you guys at the local level to be able to say, I know that all the students in this class have not had any remote test. They've not had a face-to-face NRS approved test. You can clearly see that on the classes page, which I'll show you in just a second. So what does this really mean when you have a class with both NRS tested and non-NRS tested students participating, which is the question that was just asked in the Q&A. What it does mean is that we're asking you to mirror your classes or have parallel classes. So you would want to create a parallel class per your regular class to house the non-NRS tested students that are placed in the class, because in real life they're in the same class. They're both in the remote learning class, they're both in the face-to-face class, whatever the case may be, but they are in the same physical class in real life. In Teams, however, you are going to have to create this sort of parallel class, which is something we're familiar with. It's what we used to do for distance learning, but you're going to have to create this parallel class. And what that's going to really allow for you guys to do is have this distinction when you're viewing things at this class level, that you can see clearly which classes are NRS approved students and which classes contain non-NRS approved tested students. And this is just kind of an example of, something you would see. What I would say is that when you're building these parallel classes is have a cohesive naming convention, so that you, when you're going in as a director, a supervisor, a person that's doing the data analysis, and a performance accountability person, you can, or even a testing supervisor, you can clearly see how many students you have out there that still do not have a NRS approved test. And I'm going to go over some of the features at the class level and tell you that from the point of time that these individual students are tested with an NRS approved test, you will no longer be able to enter contact time at the class level. Teams will come up and say, this person now has a TABE test. This person now has a CASAS test. You need to make sure that you're entering all that contact time in a different class that is, a regular class, not this non-NRS class. They're no longer eligible, for non-NRS. So that's some of the business rules that we built into play here. So you can kind of see very high level at just pulling this up at the class, how many non-NRS approved classes you still have out there and how many students are attached to those classes. Before we move on, questions?
Yes. So we had Katarina, who was kind of continuing with her question on the TABE test. Is COVID-19 enough justification? The TABE is not compatible with cell phones, which is what most of the students use. I believe, for administering the only one TABE test.
Yeah, I think just putting the explanation, that's likely what we would ask you to state. You know, limited testing resources, but I would also, and this is probably something you're going to see when we respond in terms of an actual answer on the FAQ, is, you know, working towards meeting the requirements in the assessment guide. We don't mind being flexible. We get it. But again, the goal is always to, you know, follow the policy, and, you know, we're trying to make our way back to that as much as possible. So I would say look at the answer that we put when we put the FAQ or the Q&A back out, and we'll try to be as, you know, robust as we can to give you some good parameters there for what to include.
All right, and Suzanne Nuttingham asks, has the team's trek related to employment outcomes that was scheduled but canceled a few weeks ago been rescheduled? Training, the team's training.
Oh, team's training. No, it has not, Suzanne, but that's one of the things I want to get on the schedule in terms of webinars coming up.
All right, and Anonymous asks, if we have a student that exited Best Plus 2.0 oral and not literacy, what happens to those students if we are not administering the literacy exam face-to-face?
Good question. Those students would have to go in as a non-NRS student unless you're going to transition to CASAS. So you would either have to transition them to another, you know, remote test, NRS approved test. If you can't do that, or, you know, that's not an option, then they would have to go into Teams as a non-NRS tested student for PY 2021.
And Anonymous also asked, just for clarification, about what does NRS mean and what stand for, and is NRS high school level students?
No, NRS is National Reporting System, and that is the adult education, you know, that's for adult education, not K through 12.
And then, will we have to indicate these separate classes on separate class rosters?
No, you mean like in real life? No, absolutely not. You'll still just pull the information, because again, the classes in terms of real life are just, you know, happening, and the students will be together, you know, in the same class, you know, in real life. It's just in Teams, you'll have to track them separately. So you could just have one sign-in sheet, because that's the way that that's happening. It's going to be up to you guys in terms of what the process looks for the data entry part, to make sure that the students are getting teased out. And Teams is going to help you, because if they don't have an assessment, it's not going to let you, you know, enter it into the class. So.
All right, and Anonymous says, we use the TABE test. Is TABE NRS approved?
Yes, TABE 1112 is NRS approved.
And Oscar asks, in regards to these non-NRS parallel classes, will hours performed towards student program progress?
Officially, no. And this was something that Susan kind of brought up in the last session. So officially, no. Any hours associated with a non-NRS approved test don't really count in terms of, you know, students falling into performance denominators for certain things, meeting participant status, or any of that. And that's just because we haven't gotten any green light from Octave to do so. They are still of the mindset that, you know, a student is a participant, you know, in terms of being able to report them on a table when they have the direct contact test and a direct contact hours. So if we're not able to give them that NRS approved test, then the contact hours, we have no way of really saying that these people are in the performance. Now, that being said, at the state level, you know, that's one reason why we want to get the students into a class and into tables on the back end, so that I can go to DOI and I can say, what is the impact of this, you know, this remote testing and the constraints on these tests having to do with our performance? So I can pull those students out. I can see how many there are. I can see how much contact time they have accumulated that we're essentially at the federal level not getting any credit for. And we can have those conversations at the state level in terms of what that means towards meeting enrollment targets or contracted type measures. That's why we wanted to get them into teams, so we could have those conversations. We can't do that if we're just doing it on the passes tracker. It's just too much. But if we can pull it out of teams very quickly in the tables and have our data folks look at that, then that gives us, I think, a lot more opportunity to have those conversations about your contracted measures.
All right,
So
we have
some
another
things I just don't have
question.
answers for just yet, guys.
And another question coming in from Tara. Are we required to test those students whose tests are about to expire 365 days, but they are registered in class after July 1?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Tara. If a student, if their test is getting ready to expire, but you already have them in class for PY 2021, meaning, you know, they had, you know, you registered them in a class for PY 2021, then you've essentially already established, you know, that for this program year. I'm not sure I understand the question. I may have to chat with you at the end of the today or later.
Or later,
So,
okay. We have several more questions.
I know. Let's move on to the next kind of phase here, because we have a lot more to kind of talk about. We've got about 45 minutes left here. Just keep the questions coming, though. Keep them coming. I will answer them and get back with you and give you guys some answers. And again, I just want to say that your questions are going to help us to determine what webinars we need to do after this on some of these topics. We have been just blowing and going, getting team stuff out. But we have not been able to do is have a lot of training for you guys. We've got the employment outcome screens that have come out. We've got high school equivalency supportive services screens that are out there. We've got all of these changes that I'm getting ready to show you to the revised testing pages. We have a ton of stuff, and it is on us to kind of, you know, just get these webinars on the calendar and get the training piece done. It's just been, you know, it's just been a lot lately. So we know that these are things we kind of owe you guys. What I will say is I've been trying very hard and trying to be very thoughtful when I'm developing the team's release notes to put as much as I can into those team's release notes, knowing that under, you know, all the time constraints that webinars are just, you know, sometimes very difficult. And maybe these webinars, guys, and if you're up for it, I'm up for it. The hardest part for me, to be honest, is to come up with the PowerPoints with all of the screenshots, because it takes so much time to build this stuff out, put them into screenshots, make it accessible, and give the materials. If you want to just sit in a room with me in a testing environment and I can just answer questions kind of rapid fire and pull those up, I'm down for that. I'm happy to do that. So in the Q&A, if that's, you know, something that you want, you know, let me know. Go ahead and put that in there, and then we'll take all of this into consideration when we're planning for future events. Because the hardest thing for me is committing to a date and then not having time to fully prepare. If the expectation is that you guys really want the PowerPoints and, you know, just something that's just a little more useful in terms of training locally. But if you're just wanting to ask me questions and really have me go through it and show you the functionality in the system and answer questions, man, we can get those knocked out. So let us know. put it in the Q&A.
And
Okay.
as a reminder for the Q&A, we will be having all of these typed up and put into a released handout after the sessions have concluded. And be sure to go to your featured tab and to give a thumbs up next to questions that you really like.
Good idea. So next I want to talk about some of the revised testing pages that you guys are going to see. So in order to incorporate performance changes to how pre-post tests are measured per WIOA, we've removed the domain of significance because that is no longer a thing. And then we've added POP-based view to testing for students, so you can really see the holistic achievement of that student across program years, and made an option to be able to view what a participant has done based off of their period of participation. And there's a couple of reasons why we did that, but I think it'll help you guys out, you know, locally, maybe from an instructional standpoint, or just have a better idea about student behavior and the way our data looks sometimes to us, which leaves us kind of scratching our heads. But I will say that these are prototypes. So this is something that's going to be a release that's going to be coming out when Teams opens. So these are just prototypes. There may be some changes that are happening there, but these are just prototypes. So some of the back-end changes that we've done to align function to performance. The information on the pages that we're going to go over today really reflect all the business rules that we've had to create in order to modify and make sure that whatever you're seeing in Teams is aligned to the way the performance in terms of like NPRs and all these other performance reports align. Because what happens right now in Teams is you may go to that pre-post test screen and it may have something on there, and then you go to the MSG report and it's different. And there's a reason for that, and that's because certain things and certain functions and business rules in Teams have not been updated to reflect the way performance is currently tabulated or calculated. It's also going to include all the assessment guide revisions that have been made on the policy side of things. So for instance, I put on here initial placement for NRS, right? This is what it says in the actual NRS TA guidelines. Individuals will be placed in an EFL for reporting purposes for the program year based off of one of the following. The lowest initial test score, if all content area tests are taken on the same day, or the earliest test score available given new flexibilities for staggered tests in different content areas. So that's coming out of our assessment guide. That's what we said. So when we do our NRS reporting, these are the two ways that we are reporting to them in terms of how these individuals will end up in certain levels, educational functioning levels. We're either going to say, the lowest initial test score if all the content areas are on the same day. So if you give a reading, writing, and math and language all on the same day, we're going to take the lowest of those scores, and that's how we're going to put them on the NRS tables when we report them to the feds. But because we have implemented a staggered testing option, what we're saying is the earliest test score available, giving the staggered testing options, is how we're going to report them. So if you do math first, and then you do reading in 3 days from then, and then you do the language, on day 5, we're going to place that student in an NRS for federal reporting based off of that first initial test, which was math. So those are some of the things in terms of the state level when we're doing our federal reporting that are very important. But they are not necessarily things that you guys really have ever, I think, seen in Teams, other than this DOS, which is no longer a thing. So we're taking that out. And what the DOS used to do was sort of the same function, right? So what the DOS used to do is say, we're going to place a student on an NRS federal reporting based off of their lowest functioning level. So it's kind of the same concept. We're just removing that caveat, and we're removing that purple lettering from Teams so that you guys can really see it the way that we're going to be reporting it to the feds. So bringing forward valid tests across years. Let's talk about this, and this kind of goes back to maybe some of the questions that Tara was asking. So TWC is allowing for 365 days due to the COVID-19. I know that the screen says 150, but these are images directly out of the assessment guide. So we've waived the 150 for now, and we're still saying 365 days. But what we are saying is if you're looking at these tests for reading, math, and language, and a person takes a test in March, and these are all their pre-test dates, and then they post-test only in one subject area, let's say reading, in this example, at the end of June. When it comes to that student continuing their services with us into the new program year, there's only really one test that's going to be able to be brought forward that's going to meet, you know, the timeline. Just change out the 150 days for 365 days. So if you have only one test that meets that 365 day, that's the only test that will be brought forward. Then you would need to test in the other areas within 5 days or 12 hours. So in this example, the reading test is valid, it gets brought forward, but the math and the language are not because they're older than 365 days. You would need to then do your math and language test, you know, prior to, based off of the assessment guide. So that's kind of what we're talking about. It's a little weird because in the assessment guide, we're saying 150 days, but we've given this waiver because of COVID for 365 days. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but we've made that exception so that, you know, you guys have some options and can utilize tests, and we don't have a ton of students that just all of a sudden have these invalid tests just based off of the assessment guide. So let's look at it when we're talking about across program years and how the performance alignment is. And this is just an example. If you have a period of participation that's spanning across 2 program years, and you have a student who took a pre-test, let's just say they took a pre-test at the end of July, at last year, we'll use last year for our purposes since it's timely. They took a pre-test at the end of July, and then they took a post-test for that program year for PY 1920. They took a post-test in April. What we're saying is that that post-test that they took in April for PY 1920 can act as the pre-test for PY 2021. You can bring those accumulated hours that have occurred after April, bring them forward into the new year. So there's no need to do a new testing series prior to them starting classes July 1 in the new program year. You simply look back, they have a valid test, you register them for class. Teams is going to allow it because, again, it's going to look back and it's going to say, is there a test available for use? Yes or no. If the answer is yes, it's going to pull those tests forward automatically. It's also going to pull forward all the contact hours that have been accumulated, even in an old program year, if you're bringing a test forward. And that's an important part, because what that allows is for you to post-test this individual much quicker, right? If you were looking at something from like July to the end of August, maybe that's not enough hours accumulated to post-test someone. But if you get to bring forward all of those hours from that last test and bring those hours forward and count them towards hours between tests for the test publisher's recommended time. Then when you post-test them, as you can see in this image in October, that is now the post-test for PY 2021. Okay, so hopefully this kind of helps to explain how some of this is going to work. At least I hope it does. But that is the way that the new, you know, what you can expect to see whenever Teams opens. And by the way, it's always been this way. Many programs I know just kind of hard tested everyone July, like, you know, when students kind of came back into classes, they just, you know, they had these sort of, you know, tested students right at the top to start a new baseline for the program year. But Teams has always had the flexibility to be able to bring an old test from an old program year forward to be used as a baseline in the new program year. So that's kind of a local decision. I just think some people and some folks have made over time because the test was just really old, and you know, I get it. I'm just saying for the purposes of this year and because of COVID and because of the remote testing and because of all of these things, you know, you can pull forward old tests to be used. So I'm going to stop and answer questions.
You ready for this?
Always.
All right, so we're going to kind of go back to where we left off and kind of scroll through some of these, and it may just be that they're going to need an in-depth response in writing with more research afterwards. So from Sherry Smith Dennis, are we not still able to administer best literacy face-to-face?
You can, if you can implement the social distancing, you know, requirements and feel like you can meet those requirements and still do that. I mean, we don't have any restrictions at the state level. That's a local decision.
Then Anonymous asks, if students have already been in a class without NRS and then get one, do they actually have to be transferred now?
Yes. Well, wait, say that again.
If students have already been in a class without NRS and then get one, do they actually have to be transferred now?
So let's just say you've been tracking them on the PASSES tracker. That's what I'm interpreting this question as. You've been putting them on the PASSES tracker, and now they have received their NRS approved test. Yes, you would have to put them into the class in Teams and track them there.
And Region 5, Brenda is asking, so at this point, we shouldn't count on non-NRS students counting as part of our enrollment targets.
I'm not going to answer that because I don't want to, A, I don't want to give you false hope, and B, I don't want to discourage you. But I think it's a very valid point, and I'm going to elevate that very valid point and see what we can do at the state level in terms of contracted measures. And that's what I'll say until I get some further discussion on that one.
All right, and another Anonymous, will Teams allow the data specialist to enter the contact hours for those students under the non-NRS class?
Yes, you will be able to enter, it'll work and function at the class level just like any other class. So you'll be able to designate distance learning, you'll be able to enter direct, proxy, and training hours. You'll be able to track training services. All the functionality will exist.
And also, students that have already been in a class without NRS approved test and then get one, do they actually have to be transferred? I think that's a repeat. Are tests good?
Well,
for,
and I'll just say, like, if the student is in a parallel class and they end up, let's just say they come into the system, you can't give them any kind of NRS approved test. So you're doing staff determined eligibility. You put them into Teams under an NRS approved test or NRS designated class, right? Because they don't have a TABE, they don't have a CASAS. And then you're able to get them into the remote testing cycle, or you're able to test them face to face, or whatever the mechanism is. Now they have an NRS approved test. then you physically, from a data entry standpoint, need to drop that student from the NRS designated class, and you need to enroll that student and register that student for the NRS approved class, the normal class, the regular class. So that is something that, you know, literally from a data entry standpoint would need to happen so that we can start seeing that individual student on, you know, the NRS reported timelines.
And from Louisa Neal, can we move students between parallel classes once we test them using either TABE or Best Plus?
Yes.
And provided a response, yes. So
yes.
be
yes.
sure to
and
check that out.
Yeah, that's the primary function of going back and kind of having them parallel and using a naming convention when you're setting those up, so that as students kind of move from one to the other, you'll be able to hopefully see the, you know, see it cycling down, or you'll be able to see how many students. And what you can do there, for those of you that, you know, don't drop students from classes, and I know many of you stopped doing this because there's really no benefit from an exiter standpoint. But if you drop a student from a class and you actually go in there to the class, their class registration page, and you put a drop date, they come into what is called inactive. When you pull up that class level on a class search, that's why you see all, active, inactive, etc. It all has to do with whether or not that date, if you've put a drop date on there. So just from a data entry perspective, for those of you that are, you know, responsible for that, as students move and get an NRS approved test, and you're moving them from a non-NRS designated class to a regular class, put in the drop date on the non-NRS designated class, and then move them into your regular class.
Thank you, Mahalia. Susan Gussler is asking if we can only roll over one CASA score for a student who was enrolled last year but dropped. Can they be enrolled in a class as assessed?
Yes.
And
as
Maria,
long as you have at least one NRS approved test that is within that 365 days, you will be able to register that student for a regular class in Teams.
All right, and there was a question asking where they can find the latest Teams release notes, and Maria posted that they were sent in an email transmittal from Mahalia on the 24th at 5:23 p.m. And
perfect. And I think TCAL is also putting them on their website. That one may not be on there but I think in general they are.
And Sergio Rodriguez asks, regarding Tara's question, if we do add a new test after a student is already in a class after July 1 and has acquired 40 or more hours and is ready for post-test, but their last test already expired, will the new test count as a post-assessment or a new baseline?
It depends. So the way things are going to work now is that you will have, if you think of it this way, guys, take your instrument group, TABE, CASAS, whatever it is, and then you take the domain and the content area. What you're essentially going to have is a pre-post test line for each instrument group in each content area. So for your question, if that is the first test and the only valid test for that individual content area, for that program year, it's going to act as a pre-test for that content area. Okay, so that's something that you will, need to take into consideration. If you're only bringing forward, like in Susan's example, and this will make sense for those of you that know this very well. For others that are just coming into this, I'm sure this probably sounds like Klingon or something. But if you are only bringing forward one NRS approved test in one content area, let's say CASAS or let's say TABE math, okay? And you register a student for class using that TABE math. There's no other content area in TABE like reading or language that is eligible to be used. So all you have is that math test. You can still register a student for a class, a regular class, because you have a valid test. And then you decide on day 3, day 5, whatever, to test that student in all the other areas, okay? What you're essentially doing is you are creating a pre-test in that specific content area for that program year. That's what you're essentially doing. So it's not just about having, you know, like a pre-test for by instrument. What we're doing with the staggered testing is we are creating a space that you can have individual content areas that are kind of on their own timeline, essentially. And that's what the staggered testing, you know, kind of just does automatically, because if you're doing those tests certain days apart or certain hours apart or things like that. And the reason why we're doing that is, guys, it's different everywhere. Everybody out there is doing something different. So not everybody does like, oh, we're going to do TABE and we're going to do all content areas on the same day. And that's just the way that we do things. Many people do it that way, but many people say, we can't do it that way. That's not how it works. And especially when TABE first came out and it was such a mess and it was 6 hours and, you know, students aren't going to sit for 6 hours and all of this. But essentially what you have is, you know, an opportunity to have maybe a pre-test on some content areas that just don't have a valid test that's coming forward. And they will act sort of as a pre-test for that specific content area for that program year. So hopefully that's, you know.
Good job, Mahalia.
At least a little clear. I see like a lot of image development in my near future for some of this. I think the images help. They really help me, guys. I do this for you, but I do this for me too. I mean, and I do this for my staff too, because I have to see it visually. That's what helps me kind of understand all of this stuff. Next question.
So Risa Wingfield is asking, if all tests are given on different days, but the first contact hour is after all tests have been completed, will placement be based on the lowest score or the first test?
It'll be based off of the first test. Good question, Risa. That goes back to the language that we put into the assessment guide. If they're all given, it's this first bullet here, the lowest initial test score if all content area tests are taken on the same day. Now, a reminder that in terms of post-testing and making a gain, you can make a gain in any content area as long as, you know, there's a gain. So it's no longer, so even though we put them on the NRS tables for federal reporting based off of, you know, the initial test, you can make a gain on any test in any content area, and it's going to count as a gain. That's why I said the whole part about if you're bringing forward one content area, right, that's going to be the pre-test for that program year for that specific content area. But then you have to actually give the other 2 areas. You're still actually, you know, providing a pre-test for those 2 content areas, and then any other test in those content areas after that initial test are still going to count as post-test and are still going to calculate gains across any content area.
Okay, and we have a question. Will the removal of DOS apply the participant roster and other reports?
Really good question, and I will talk about that when we get to the end, when I'm talking about what's coming down the pipeline in the future with reports. So Elena, we're getting a little short on time, so I want to move on.
We'll keep going, and any questions that are not answered directly during the session, we will get to all of those in some form of writing next week. So if we don't get to you, don't worry. It won't be said out loud during this session, but those answers will come next week. And as we said, just go to the featured tab, check out what questions have already been submitted, give a thumbs up to the ones that you like or you want the most answers to, and we will get to those after this conference ends.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to see, right, aesthetically in Teams, because it is going to look a little different. And so I don't want you guys going in there and panicking, that it looks different. So let's kind of talk about this. So this is the test summary page. This is what we are currently calling the assessment page. So if you go to a participant record, and if you guys want to open up Teams on a second screen and that makes most sense for you, please do so. This is what we currently call the assessment page in Teams. You go to the participant record. Up at the top, there's a bunch of blue little hyperlinks. You can see some other ones in this image here. One of them is the assessment page. This is now going to be called test summary page. Okay, it's going to look a little different. So the biggest difference that you will see is that anything related to performance and to actual calculation of gains has been moved to the pre-post test gains page. That's what makes sense, because you're really measuring a pre and you're measuring a post. So we wanted to get all of that information on the pre-post test gains page. What this page is going to tell you is a summary of all of the tests that the student has taken since they have been with us. It's going to tell you the instrument that the student used, content area of that instrument, their starting EFL in that particular program year for that particular instrument in that particular content area, and then the ending EFL for the same. At the very last column, what it's going to include is it's going to give you a hyperlink. So if you want to look at those 3 levels, for instance, there at the very top, you can click on that. It's going to take you to the educational outcomes page so that you can see exactly how that was applied from a performance perspective. So what does this really tell us? Well, if you're looking at this example right now, it's just meant to really be a quick glance view of a student's time with us. So if you look at 2017, 2018, you can see that this is an ESL student. You can see at the end of 2017, 2018, that this student was pretty much getting to the top of what was available in terms of ESL levels. Flash forward to 2018, 2019, and what you can see really is that those 2 tests were brought forward. That's what we're talking about. They were really just brought forward to be used. So this person was probably registered for ESL classes. The instrument used when they registered them for classes was the best series. So they did some sort of ESL classes at the beginning of the year. However, they were topped out. So there was a need to now supply this individual with an AB academic, scheduled test. So they transferred them to the TABE 1112, and then you can see that they had a starting educational functioning level for each content area of the TABE that they took during that transitional period, but there was no post-test that was taken for the TABE. The interesting thing for me is, if you'll notice, from 2017 to 2018, they ended their ending EFL was higher. And then they came back in 2018, 2019, and what happened when they were starting? They went back lower. Weird stuff like that is all over our data. And it leaves us at our, in kind of saying, what are some of the things that causes things like this when a student gets to a certain point at maybe the end of their year with us, and then they come back in the following program year, and all of a sudden, there's a regression. What are some of the things that, contribute to that? Is it, a period of participation? Did they exit and then they come back? All of these things. So one thing that's going to help us, I think, to kind of better understand some things is some of the subtle changes that we're making with some of these pages and what you guys will actually have access to see. Some of the other subtle changes that are happening is with the class page or with the participant record page. So currently on the participant record page, if you scroll all the way down to the participant record at the very bottom, this is what you see there on the left. You see classes, you see a class number, you see a class name, you see a site name, you see a begin date. And that's pretty much it. What we're doing is we are revising that, and we are adding in all this other information there on the front page of the participant record. So you're now going to be able to see grant recipient, site, class, instrument group, begin date of the class, contact hour date, funding source, and then direct proxy training, and whether or not it's a non-NRS approved class. You're going to get to see all of that now on the very front page of the participant record. The reason for that is because some of this information actually existed on the pre-post test page, and when I show you, you know, there's just no real estate, you know, really there now. So this is what it's now going to look like on the first page of the participant record. So you're going to get all this great information there. The grant recipient column is super new, and what this is meant is to let you guys know, and you will be able to see if you have students who are participating and enrolled in classes with other grant recipients. We get a lot of questions on the POP report or some of the other reports that we will likely be creating, which is kind of like, why does it say this person has this many hours? They've only sat in class with us for 40 hours. Why is it saying they got 65? And it's because you don't really have a lens into what's happening with that participant outside of what you specifically as a grant recipient or, you know, the class in that grant recipient is doing with the participant. Now you're going to get to see it. So in this particular instance, Abilene and Angelina are sharing a student for that program year. And you can see some of the hours. You're going to be able to see, you know, the class begin date. You're going to be able to see some sort of high level information of what that looks like. So I think that's pretty cool. Why we really made this change, again, it's just to allow you to kind of see things more holistically of what's happened with that student and what's happening with that participant. But it's really also because we needed some real estate on the pre-post test page, and some of that information that existed there, we just felt like, why would that not just be under classes and all be in one place? So let's talk about what you can expect to see on some of the new screens for the pre-post test page. I feel like I missed a slide there. Hold on. Guess not. So on the pre-post test page, let's talk about what your options are going to be. Okay. So we have two options that are now going to be available to you. One is a program year option, and one is a POP view option. So I want to talk to you about what the program year option is going to look like. It's going to look like this. So at the very top of your pre-post test gains page, so again, the pathway there is when you click on a participant and you go to this pre-post test gains page, this is what you're going to see. We have now moved the add test or add assessment feature to the pre-post test gains page. It no longer is going to reside under the test summary page, because that is just a summary of all the tests that the student has had, you know, since, you know, their time with us forever. It's now going to be on the pre-post test gains page right up there at the top. You can see it on your screen designated as number 1. Item number 2, you're going to be able to see the test given by grant recipient broken down. Number 3, you're going to see instrument and content area broken out. And then the last thing on the very far end, you're going to see if they made a gain and also what year that gain was applied in. So if you're really taking a look at this, what you're going to notice is that we have separated out the instruments and the content areas specifically. So if you're looking at a person that's had a Best Plus, you're going to see all the Best Plus in one area, okay, for oral. If you have a person that's a TABE math, you're going to see all the math for that TABE in one area, so that you can really see in terms of test levels and scores and things like that, how quickly they are moving up and how quickly they are advancing at a very content area specific level. You're also going to see things like direct plus proxy hours between tests. You're also going to see the days between tests. So for those of you that have all these questions about when is this 365 days, are they going to have a valid test? My first thing to tell you is that you need to get that from the MSG report. However, you are now going to be able to see it at the individual participant page, and you will have an export feature to be able to export all of this, everything on this page. So that's the program year view. So you can select the program year from the drop down there at the top, just like you always have been able to. And what you're going to be able to see is all the tests that are associated with that program year. And then you're going to have a pop level view as well. And this is going to be something, you know, this is like a brand new feature. So what we know about the way our performance works and the way that we look at students in terms of program entry and program exit is their whole period of participation. On all participants' front page or their first record page, you have a period of participation kind of calculator on there, right? It says when to start, and this is the place where you would enter like exclusionary reasons or things like that. But you have them all listed out there. This drop down that you're seeing here designated by a number 1 is going to include any period of participation that this particular student has had. You can select the period of participation and it is going to show you all the tests in each instrument group and each content area for the participant, okay, throughout that entire period of participation. And the reason for that is because when we have students that come in, you know, they're crossing over program years or they're staying for, you know, multiple program years, we have to right now look at things very kind of siloed by those program years. This will allow you to just select it based off of whenever their last program entry date was, and see everything that the student has accomplished for the whole time that they've been with us. It'll also help you to see any, you know, possible anomalies with the testing cycles. So if you have students, you know, we see this a lot with our ESL students. They'll do really, really well all year and they test really high at the end of the year. Then they come back the next year and we give them a test and they're like, okay. And then they do really poorly. And so sometimes you see this sort of ebb and flow and they go really high and then they come back and they go really, you know, they test lower. And those are the types of things that we're always kind of like, what is causing this to happen? Why is this a thing? But at least now when we do it this way, you'll be able to kind of see those things in the data. It is going to have a page export feature as well. I mentioned this. So you're going to click the export, or you'll be able to click an export button. You're going to get an Excel document, and then you're going to have 3 print options. You can either print the most recent program year and the pop view. You can select a program year or a specific pop, or you can print all of it. So you're going to have some options in terms of the export features and the print options. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure we've got some good questions, but Elena, is there any that are quick that I can kind of answer? And
so I'm going to go from the bottom and work our way up.
Okay.
So a student has a TABE and CASAS. How will this affect the grant recipient as far as performance?
If they have a TABE and a CASAS, is that the question?
Yes.
Well, Potentially, it won't. The way that we look at things and the way that performance is calculated is by test instrument. So if you transition from like a TABE to a CASAS in a singular program year, you just have to make sure that you post test on whatever instrument you're wanting us to utilize as for the gains or for the progress. So if you're going from a TABE and you want to switch to a CASAS, that's fine. Just know that when you do that switch, whatever the first test is, let's just say you're switching to CASAS, whatever that first CASAS test is and whatever content areas that you cover with the CASAS, just know that you would have to post test on CASAS in order to get credit for performance. So it's always pre and post for whatever test instrument that you're using and whatever content area that you've used. So that's the way we kind of measure things. You have options there, but you just have to make sure that it's both a pre and a post test on the same instrument and the same content area. So you can't get a gain on a CASAS test based off of a TABE pre-test, I guess is what I'm saying.
All right, and Tiffany Lee, when will the push out for the update be? Will the new year still be August 14th or will it be sooner?
Right now it is scheduled to release August 14th. And they may have to stagger some of this. So the things that I'm going over with you guys on the pages may come out a little later, but the ability to carry forward, a test for 365 days and all the things that I went over at the very top, that's what for sure will happen August 14th. So you guys can start doing your data entry.
And then there's a question, will the 90-day Exeter rule be voided due to COVID?
No. It's not a state level decision. That's a federal requirement.
All right, and this one from Denise Perdue. Would you agree that these reports would be great to share with each faculty member to track their students' progress?
Yes, I would agree. And that's really what all of this is about, guys, is giving you resources and tools at the local level. And that's why we kind of want to tell you about some future plans, because I know we've been talking about reports for years now, and it's just, it's taking forever, and it's like, I'm with you. So are there any other questions, Elena? Because if not, I'll talk about that.
Will there be dates on the test summary page or a way to know what grantee administered the test?
Not on the test summary page. You can go to the pre-post test gains page and you'll have all of that information, including if you have multiple grant recipients that are providing pre or post testing for a student.
And when will the new test summary page update be implemented?
If it doesn't come out, hold on, I'm pulling up some timelines here. If it doesn't come out with the 8/14 release, then it'll come out with the 9/8 release.
Okay. And is the assessment page by student only, or can this be run as a class?
Student only. Now you can run this, and the main reason why we're doing all of this at the participant level is so that it aligns to your MSG management report. So you have a new report in Teams. It came out the end of March. That's called the MSG management report. And that is the report that if you want a holistic view by grantee that you can filter by provider, by site, by class, that is the report that you will want to utilize.
All right, and probably the last one for this will be from Louisa Nail. What is the difference then between a rollover and a bring forward hours from the previous year?
Not much. Those terms are, typically, synonymous with each other. we're just basically saying that you're bringing forward an old test, and there may be some hours, contact hours attached to that test that occurred, afterward. And you're going to be able to utilize that for hours between testing in the new program year. So those are kind of one and the same.
All right, and just one more from Ronetta Urton. Can a student earn a gain if they are exit level in CASAS and take the HSE CASAS test?
No. No, they can't.
Okay, so there are plenty more questions, but they will require a little bit more in-depth. So if you want to kind of continue on, Mahalia, to get us to wrap up since we're already at noon.
Sure. So one thing I just wanted to quickly go over with you guys are some future enhancements. I talked about this a little earlier, which is the next big thing coming out from us, currently scheduled, I think, in October. After all of this is profiles and aligning profiles to periods of participation, and then adding this public assistance page. So the profiles update, and this is just really high level because we're still working on all the IT requirements for this. But what you can kind of expect here is to align the profiles to POPs. And that's the way it's supposed to have been for the last 5 years. It's just really, we've got one programmer, and y'all, she's awesome, but she is only one person, but I keep her very busy. But is to really make sure that we're aligning profiles to periods of participation. So when a person exits the program and they come back to us, technically we're supposed to be putting in and reviewing all the profile details to make sure, like, hey, has anything changed? We're supposed to be doing this at program entry every single time, because we report all of this information to Octave based off of periods of participation. So that's going to be the next kind of, thing that's coming down the pipeline, and it's actually a lot bigger than what I think we had anticipated, just in terms of the coding and the workload associated with that. This release will also include any of those Pearl updates that I talked about earlier with the policy letter that's going to be coming out. That's when this would happen as well, and it'll do some cleanup of some things. I'm trying to do a couple of things that just to me make more sense, like having a participant achievement page as opposed to having it attached to a profile. Some things like that. I want to add a page for counselor notes so that you guys have that. I know that would be very helpful for you and for us here at the state level. It kind of helps to tell the story when we're making decisions for students. So those are just some of the things that are going to be coming out here probably before December. And then after December is when we get into the report remediation phase of this. And this is kind of the final frontier when it comes to implementing WIOA. My goodness, it's been 6 years. Every time I think about that, it just really, I think, frames up how long it can take for some of these new, reauthorizations of these statutes to really go into effect and roll out and be implemented. It's just very difficult, particularly when you don't have those systems that are aligned to how they're measuring performance. So the report remediation is going to be a collaborative project between you guys locally, us, TWC staff, and then also our DOI or our performance folks here at the agency. There's a couple of decision points, with that work group that are going to have to be decided. One of them is, what reports do we just want to disable in Teams altogether? What reports do we want to keep, but we want to align them to current WIOA performance? And then what new reports do we need? So these are the kinds of questions. I'm going to be developing a survey. You probably won't see it till around, December or November. But the survey is going to be asking you guys in the field, which is really, what do you need in terms of reports? You know, what do you feel like you need from a management perspective, an instructional perspective? Kind of tell us what you need. And then I also want you to tell me how you utilize current reports and teams, so that I can get a better feel for what you think those reports, you know, are telling you, and how you're utilizing those reports. Because not only are we going to be looking at all the reports and teams, we're also going to be working with DOI on something called Data Warehouse. And you guys have heard me talk about this before, which is moving all of our performance reports, like our NRS tables, for instance, all the NRS tables in Teams right now. You go into Teams, you click on reports, you go over, you got tables, you know, particularly I think for you guys, tables 4, 4B. You guys really like those reports. You like the data that it provides to you, and you like the filterable options. The problem is that NRS table 4 right now looks completely different than that when we report it to the feds. So that is something that, okay, maybe that table, you know, doesn't exist anymore. But what you're saying to me is you like it because you like what it's telling you. Those are the types of conversations that we'll have in the next couple of months, trying to figure out what we want to do with all these reports and teams, and what do we really need, and what do we want to revise, and what do we want to create anew. It's going to be a sizable project for my staff, for myself, for our IT folks, and we definitely want to get your input on it. So that is coming down the pipeline. So I just wanted to say thank you. I know that's a lot, guys, and it's always scary because Teams is such a big part of, you know, what we do and how you guys, you know, report to us, and, you know, how we hold you accountable and all of those things. So I appreciate you kind of asking the thorough questions, and keep on asking them. We will keep the Q&A open until we kind of just see that the questions are you know, slowing up a bit before we close it. And then again, we will respond to those in writing, and I'll also utilize those to have future webinars on these topics that you know, feel like we really need to go back and revisit with some of these upcoming enhancements. So that is what I have. They're going to be they're going to be taking control of me right now and throwing up a survey link. I know that that's going to happen. So give us your feedback via survey if you haven't already, about just generally, you know, how this has went in terms of a business meeting. I've definitely enjoyed the time with you guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Is there anything, Elena, anybody else wanted to say before we close down here?
No, I think that's about it. We have posted that link in the featured tab under your Q&A from Amanda Sines. So go ahead and scroll all the way to the bottom and check out that survey. We still have some more questions coming in, and as Mahalia mentioned, we'll keep this open for a little while longer just to get them, and then we will be putting those all together after the fact.
I would say great job on your first solo flight.
Whew.
Good
Next
job.
year, this is going to be a, you know, I'm sorry. Well, I apologize. This seems like the business meeting's been like the Mahalia show. It's just we had a lot.